Hey, what's up fellas? My name's Anne. Basically for this series, what I'm going to be doing is doing a video on all 50 of the state's state dinosaurs. However, some states don't have a state dinosaur, unfortunately. And so instead of using the state dinosaur for that one, I will be using the state fossil. So, let's just dive right in. First up in this series is Alabama, and they hate dinosaurs, so they don't have a state dinosaur. They have a state fossil, which would be the Basilosaurus. Now you might be thinking, Basilosaurus? That's what I thought, because when I was first researching for this, if you're familiar with the naming system for dinosaurs and just like organisms in general, there's a system called binomial nomenclature, which is basically used to give every organism a unique two-word name using Latin words. So, quick little editing and note, using binomial nomenclature is not only like limited to Latin. You can use like really any language. It just has to have two words in it that identifies the genus and then the species of the organism. So there you go, correcting myself. And using that system, saurus is typically used for like dinosaurs and aquatic reptiles such as mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. With Basilosaurus, it's contradictory because Basilosaurus, whose name literally translates to king lizard, is a whale. So there's that. Put all your disappointments aside, because even though this guy is not a dinosaur, he's still pretty cool, I think. The Basilosaurus family consists of two species, Basilosaurus isis and Basilosaurus Cetoides, with Cetoides being the larger of the two, and also with Cetoides being the actual species that is used for Alabama's state fossil. Not only was Cetoides larger, it was also more specialized, which basically just meant that it had a more specific diet and it filled a more specific role in the ecosystem. An example of a specialized organism now might be like an anteater or a panda, how they have specific adaptations to eat their specific foods. Now, Cetoides was not exactly quite as specialized as these guys. It just happened to be more specialized than Isis, where it ate more specific foods, where Basilosaurus isis just kind of ate whatever it wanted to. So Isis was more global than Cetoides as well. There's actually a term for that called cosmopolitan, which basically just means that you can find them all over the globe. This is very similar to like killer whales today, where you can find them in like all the oceans, right? Isis was more around the Americas during the time that it lived. It was known mostly around what's now the Gulf of Mexico and southern Alabama. They both lived around the same time, approximately 35 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch of the Cenozoic. The reason behind this guy's contradictory name is because of its build. If you look at him, guaranteed the first thing you're gonna notice is, holy shit, this guy is long. Because this guy is long. They reached about 18 to 20 meters for Cetoides, while Isis only reached about 15 to 18 meters. In empirical measurements, that's 60 to 70 feet for Cetoides and 50 to 60 feet for Isis. So they were pretty long, with a very proportionately small skull. And along with that, their skull was also very, like, I don't know how to describe it. Look at this guy, okay? Look at him. He looks a little bit like a snake. A little bit. When Basilosaurus was first discovered, it was thought to be an ancient sea serpent instead of an ancient whale. And this was because of its really long, serpentine-esque body. Actually, the Basilosaurus I'm currently drawing in this video comes nowhere close to doing this guy justice. I didn't realize this until after I'd already finished shading him and after I had written the script. So, take my little drawing with a grain of salt. He's a cute little guy. Okay, leave him be. The holotype, or the first fossil to name and classify a new species, was a Cetoides individual that was discovered in Wichita Parish, Louisiana in 1832. This fossil was a single vertebrae, which when sent to the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, was described and named by Richard Harlan in 1834. Harlan then collected more Cetoides specimens from John G. Craig, who was a judge in Alabama at the time. You can blame Richard Harlan for thinking that this guy was a serpent and gave him the wrong name, I guess. Fun fact, before Basilosaurus was recognized as a new species, their fossils were actually regularly used in furniture and construction. And if you don't believe me, then you can take it up with the University of Alabama, because that's where I found that information from. Several years later, in 1839, Richard Harlan decided to take a few Basilosaurus specimens to England, where they could be studied further by Richard Owen, a well-known naturalist and biologist at the time. Luckily, Owen had a better set of eyes than Harlan and noticed that the teeth from Basilosaurus were different from those found in reptiles. Basilosaurus had double-rooted hind teeth, which is a characteristic found in mammals and rarely in other groups of organisms. It was then classified as the first marine mammal and cetacean discovered in the fossil record. Cetaceans, in case you don't know, are the group of mammals including like whales and dolphins and stuff like that today. Now, it's important to note that while this guy was the first whale to be discovered, it was not the first ancestor to modern whales. That title would go to Pachycetus, which was a deer, rat, dog-like creature that lived about 50 million years ago, which was a full 10 million years before Basilosaurus ever roamed the waters. After this discovery, Owen suggested renaming Basilosaurus to Zeuglodon Cetoides, after its teeth. However, the original name was kept due to the rules for naming new species. The first name is always going to be the one that's kept. Now let's get more into where Basilosaurus actually lived and what it ate and what he actually got up to in its everyday life. Basilosaurus Cetoides and Basilosaurus isis, like mentioned before, lived in separate parts of the world, with Cetoides mainly living in the shallow seas that covered southern Alabama during the Eocene. Isis is more thought to be cosmopolitan, again, meaning that it roamed all over the globe, where its remains have been found across the eastern Atlantic deposits along North African shores. Both species were top predators of their environments, filling a niche very similar to that of modern-day killer whales. Cetoides mainly fed on fish and sharks up to 50 centimeters in length. If you're American, that is about 20 inches. There's also some slight evidence of whale-on-whale violence, as bite marks from larger whales have been found on the skulls of juvenile and smaller whales. The environment that Basilosaurus lived in was drastically different from the environments that current whales live in, as the Earth during the Eocene was much more warm and much more tropical than today. The average temperature during the time when Basilosaurus would have roamed the oceans would have been around 28 degrees Celsius or 84 degrees Fahrenheit. For reference, today the average temperature is 14 degrees Celsius or about 57 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a crazy difference. These warmer temperatures meant that the sea levels were much higher than today, as there were no polar ice caps at all. The Earth at the time would have been covered in immense rainforests, with most of the world's oceans being tropical. Basilosaurus was very well adapted for these warm temperatures, which inevitably led to its extinction when the Earth quickly cooled as a result of continents shifting into their places where they are today, along with ocean currents changing around the same time period. Most ancient whales went extinct around this time, including Basilosaurus, as the ancestors of modern-day toothed and baleen whales diversified due to the newly opened niches. Basilosaurus, along with other ancient whales that died out around the same time, unfortunately did not leave any descendants, and are the end of their lineages, which is a really super duper shame, because look at how adorable these guys are. Aww. Mistaking Basilosaurus for a marine reptile might seem like a really difficult mistake to make. However, Basilosaurus did share a very similar body plan to Mosasaurus, a well-known sea serpent having been discovered in 1764. This is an example of convergent evolution, where two animals that aren't related evolved the same or similar characteristics to serve the exact same purpose. Basilosaurus and Mosasaurus are extremely distant relatives. One of them's a reptile, one of them's a mammal. So that goes to show how that long serpentine body was successful enough to be long-lasting and evolve into two completely different species. Basilosaurus moved with a very similar to nearly identical motion of whales and cetaceans today, using an undulatory or up and down movement of the tail to propel itself forward while its front flippers helped to steer it. What really made Basilosaurus and other ancient whales stand out from modern cetaceans, other than the comparatively long and scrawny body, was their skull anatomy. The skulls of ancient whales such as Basilosaurus were more reminiscent of those of their terrestrial ancestors than today's modern whales. As whales evolved, their skulls started to gradually telescoping, where parts of the skull started overlapping to make room for their melons, which is the sensory organ that they use for echolocation. For example, take this image of a modern dolphin skull compared to a dog skull. The highlighted sections show the maxilla, frontal, and occipital bones in the skull. Notice how in the dog skull, all three bones are completely separate and visible, while the dolphins are all kind of like squooshed to the point where the frontal bone is barely visible. Now, if we take a little look-see at the Basilosaurus skull, we can clearly see that the telescoping is not present. Also, as whales evolved, their nostrils gradually moved up to the top of their skull from the tip of the snout. Unlike modern whales, Basilosaurus still had its nostrils about halfway up the snout, and had no room in the skull for a melon, so Burrow could not use echolocation. We do, however, have fossil evidence that Basilosaurus likely had a very similar system for hearing underwater like modern-day cetaceans. For reference, most mammals, including humans, lose their directional hearing when underwater because the sound waves traveling through the water need to go through our skulls before reaching our inner ear. This means that anything we hear underwater passes into our ears at the same time, causing us to lose our directional hearing. We have directional hearing because sound passes through our ears at slightly different times when not in water, allowing us to hear where a sound is coming from, due to the difference in time reaching these separate ears. Directional hearing is strongly favored in evolution, as it allows animals to hear where a predator or danger might be coming from. Cetaceans avoid this dilemma by using a fat pad in their jaw that connects directly to their inner ear. Basilosaurs likely had a very similar fat pad, shown from their thin jawbones and slightly disconnected inner ear bones, specifically with the tympanic bulla. The pictures that I'm about to put on the screen might be a little daunting. I'll try my best to explain. This image is a tympanic bulla found in a modern white-tailed deer. Arrows A and B both point to attachment points in the tympanic bulla, while C is the medial edge. Earbones like these are very similar from one terrestrial animal to the next. All 6 of these are fossils from a more derived ancient whales than Basilosaurus. Derived basically just means that they came after it. They're more closely related to modern whales. However, they do share a similar structure to what Basilosaurus would have had. My first observation when I first came to these bones is that they are very round, and that's because they completely lost the attachments seen in what you'd find in terrestrial mammals. That's in order to adapt to their marine habitat. Instead of having those attachments, there is literally just a gap in their ear to better accommodate for the prevention of skull vibrations and thus loss of directional hearing. In life, Basilosaurus likely had a fat pad in his lower jaw like today's whales. The reduction of tympanic connections would have also allowed for these lessened skull vibrations, allowing the whale to sense vibrations from different parts of the fat pad almost directly to the inner ear, allowing for directional hearing even underwater. Fun fact before I finally end my yapping, Basilosaurus had remnants of an external ear canal from its terrestrial ancestors, which is pretty cool. It was likely vestigial, meaning that it was basically an artifact of its ancestors that it evolved from, and it likely didn't use it at all in life. But this meant that Basilosaurus may have still been able to hear above water despite it being fully aquatic. So, there you have it, Alabama. You might not have gotten a cool dinosaur, but you got a pretty fucking sick whale, okay? And when I tell you guys that I've been yapping about Basilosaurus for weeks while I've been researching this guy, I'm not lying. My friends are probably sick of me talking about this guy all the time. Like, it's insane. I'm a yapper, right? Like, this guy was literally a mammalian sea serpent when it lived. Like, can you imagine, like, going to SeaWorld and seeing, like, a fucking fat mosasaurus instead of an orca? That'd be kind of insane. I might go bonkers, okay? Like, perhaps even a little flabbergasted. Anyway, really, thank you to anyone that made it this far into the video. I spent a while on this project as I am a college student and I have my other classes and I work a part-time job. So this is really like something that I only put like maybe an hour or two into a day. So any support, really, any support at all, greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much. I've been wanting to do this for so long. Like, paleontology has always been one of my hugest passions ever since I was a kid. And I only recently decided to start trying to share it with other people. Anyway, so be on the lookout for the next little while for my videos for Alaska and Arizona. I hope to see you guys soon, and I hope you guys have a splentacular day.